We dare you. Yes, indeed. All right, well, let's go ahead and get started here, and we'll continue to allow folks to roll in and join us. My name is Jenna Ben-Yehuda. I'm the president and CEO of the Truman Center for National Policy and the Truman National Security Project. I'm really thrilled to be here with three terrific folks to talk about a really critical element of the post-COVID recovery conversation, especially as relates to the economy. And so today's session is focusing on how the key to that recovery has a lot to do with clean energy and what that looks like for climate. And so we are really fortunate here to have two of the, I think, most dynamic speakers on this particular topic, especially from a national security perspective. Sherri Goodman and Greg Douquet. Sherri is senior strategist at the Center for Climate and Security. She's a member of its advisory board, chair of the board of the Council on Strategic Risks, Secretary General of the International Military Council on Climate and Security. She is a senior fellow with the Wilson Center. She served as CEO and president of the Ocean Leadership Consortium and senior vice president, general counsel, and corporate secretary of CAN. From early, 93 to 2001, Sherri was the Deputy Undersecretary of Defense for Environmental Security, the first. And she has received the DoD Medal for Distinguished Public Service twice, the Gold Medal from the National Defense Industrial Association, and the EPA's Climate Change Award. She sits on a number of boards on a wide range of think tank organizations, military family groups, the Holocaust Museum. She is a life member of the Council on Foreign Relations, serves on the board of its Center for Preventive Action, and most notably, a member of Truman's advisory board. Welcome, Sherri. It's so wonderful to have you.
Great to be here.
I hate calling Sherri. Just tell them that I'm a former Marine and I got a good haircut.
It's I know we don't know when Sherri sleeps, but we hear it happens occasionally. But Greg is a longtime friend and business partner and colleague of Sherri's, and so it's really especially fun to have y'all here together. And Greg and I have also known each other for many years. Greg is co-founder and managing partner of Red Duke Strategies, LLC, and prior to founding the company, held executive positions with the Marine Corps, supervising and conducting strategic planning for the highest key critical missions and operations in the United States. He was also Chief of Staff for U.S. Marine Forces Africa and Europe, overseeing operations stretching from Africa to Russia, and held lead responsibility for strategic planning in Afghanistan in 2010. Also does a tremendous amount of work for military families and the spouses community as well. It's really a pleasure to have you, Greg. It's great to see you again.
Thank you, Jenna.
And not last but definitely not least, our super dynamic Kara Allen, who wears a lot of Truman hats, but she also has a day job, which you wouldn't know from all of the awesome activity she does for Truman all the time. She is Senior Advisor for Policy and Regulatory Affairs at the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority. And in this role, she leads the development of the New York State Energy Plan, which is the roadmap for achieving the state's nation-leading clean energy and climate goals. She was previously Assistant Secretary of Energy to Governor Cuomo, and as the Executive Director of the Sustainable Energy and Environment Coalition, which is the coalition of congressional House members dedicated to advancing policies pertaining to clean energy innovation and job creation, environmental protection, and global climate change. She drove the legislative and communication strategy and overall agenda of the coalition, working regularly with Democratic leadership on relevant committees. She is also the co-director of the chapter, Truman's chapter in New York, and the expert group lead for our work on energy. So we are in very capable hands with Kara here today, and appreciate you making the time, and for all of you to joining us. And with that, I will turn it over to Kara for this terrific conversation. Thank you all.
Well, thank you, Jenna, for those Wonderful introductions. And Greg and Sherri, it is a pleasure to be the moderator for what promises to be a very exciting discussion. You both bring so much expertise to the table, so I'm really looking forward to tapping into that with the questions that we have prepared. As we're going through today, those of you who have joined us, feel free, we will have a period of time for Q&A. So if you have a question that occurs to you throughout our dialogue, go ahead and type it into the chat feature, and Rakia will be sending those over to me, and we'll ask those during the Q&A session. But for now, I'm going to warm us up a little bit and talk about an idea that Sherri and Greg had that came out through the Hill, actually. What was this, 2 weeks ago now, Sherri and Greg? You wrote this op-ed? All right. So, and we can certainly share that a little more broadly with folks who are interested. But in their op-ed that they co-authored, Sherri and Greg proposed the establishment of a Citizens Energy and Environmental Corps, which harkens back to one of the New Deal's most successful programs that many in the audience know well, the Civilian Conservation Corps. So Sherri, Greg, if you could take a moment and you could tell us about the origins of the CEEC, since everything in Washington must have a good acronym. So we'll keep going with CEEC forward to shorthand Citizens Energy and Environmental Corps.
Great.
Well, thank you very much, Kara, and thank you, Jenna, and it's a pleasure, Truman community, to be with you to discuss this, because you're really the perfect audience for this concept. You're really not just the audience, but you are the action group in many ways to take this to the next level. For us, you know, the concept of a Citizens Environmental and Energy Corps building on the New Deal's Civilian Conservation Corps is really a triple win. It's a triple win because it's about recovery, resilience, and clean energy. I mean, we need recovery, obviously, for economic recovery, and we need jobs. We need to build resilience into our society post-pandemic and because of the climate crisis as well. And the way to do that is through clean energy and jobs in that sector. Greg?
Yeah. So, you know, so much of life is about timing, right? I was sharing, you know, with a few of us earlier that back in '95, I did a thesis on national service. And I recall being told by a member of Congress as I was interviewing him, you know, why is it that everyone says that national service is such a great idea, but it's never come to fruition? And he said this great example of the silent majority and the vocal minority. And he may as well have said it's about timing. The timing just wasn't right in '95, and maybe it hasn't been right since. Maybe the timing is right now. Maybe COVID has, in a way, maybe not since 9/11, brought the country together in a common effort to defeat this national health crisis. And we are seeing the empowerment of not only states, counties, cities, villages, but people, where individuals are having a disproportionate effect. You know, principally essential service personnel, you know, medical service personnel, as well as, you know, other service personnel. And in our view, it's a bit of a reset. It's reminding the country of the importance of service. It's also a time where we've been devastated, our economy's been devastated by this pandemic in terms of not only GDP, but jobs. And so we have a lot of people out there that are unemployed or underemployed, and it's probably going to get a lot worse before it gets better. And so we view this as Sherri said, a win-win-win opportunity to use, as we said in our editorial, jujitsu, use the weight and the energy of this event in a productive way, towards an advanced energy future, a cleaner energy future.
So Greg, you just actually talked a little bit about the who, right? There's going to be some folks we want to target for the CEEC. The Civilian Conservation Corps, as folks know, targeted men between the ages of 17 and 28, employing them for 6-month terms, maximum of 2 years in time. And ultimately, over the course of the program's 9-year lifespan, 3 million men participated in the program across a wide array of projects, from flood risk management to general conservation to forest management. So would love to hear the two of you talk about the vision for the CEC, and that who would it look to target, and what kinds of outcomes might it seek? So for example, would it look to enroll a certain number of people? Would there be a cap on the number of people who would participate? Would we be looking to recruit from across the country, from folks from different ethnicities, different racial backgrounds, different genders? And would we be looking to enlist their services where they have interest, or would we want to have it focused on a couple of core project areas? You in the op-ed mentioned a couple of areas that where we have real need in this country. So tell us a little bit more about who you would look to be targeting and what kind of outcomes you might want to see from a program like that.
Well, Kara, thank you for that question. So the who is really, it's an inclusive America now. So then it was young men, but today, of course, it's women, diversity across the board. I think youth obviously is still very important because, youth face higher levels of unemployment now. I don't know that I would limit it to youth at this point. I mean, I think there are many, seniors even who want to serve and who can make valuable contributions. So I think in some ways the sky is the limit, or really what the capacity of the program would be. And that's going to depend on a lot about how it's set up. But there are many needs, and particularly as we make this transition into a clean energy economy, there's so much need to sort of keep up the level of renewables, grid modernization, distributed grid, and there are a whole range of valuable water and flood control projects as well. So I think that there's a great opportunity to put Americans back to work in meaningful ways through such an initiative. Greg?
Critical infrastructure is obviously in bad shape in this country, and we've been talking about it for many years. Much of that critical infrastructure has to do with advanced energy, has to do with, as Sherri mentioned, the grid. So why not rebuild it smartly for advanced energy, for lots of different clean energy sources, rather than the same old way that we built it the last time? It's a great opportunity to take a quantum step into an advanced energy future, rather than the way we've done it in the past. In terms of who we should target, yeah, I agree completely with Sherri. That's one of the fundamental differences between the CEC and the CCC. It was about, young white men for the most part. This program will be entirely inclusive, and I agree with Sherri. It doesn't have to necessarily be young people, but I do think it should focus upon the unemployed and the underemployed, because that way not only can we get people back to work in the value of work, but also I think we have a better chance of making it bipartisan, because you're not going to hear anyone from either side of the aisle talk about that good, meaningful jobs and growing industries isn't a good thing. So we'll get bipartisan support. I would also make a plug for veterans and military spouses. I'm co-director of something called the Veterans Advanced Energy Project, where we link veterans and military spouses to the advanced energy industry. This is a sweet spot for a program like this, of self-selected individuals who already believe in service, and it would be a short step. And they're hurting. I've got some interesting statistics. Veterans in the advanced energy industry have dropped from 10.12% in 2015 to 8.67% before the crisis, the COVID crisis. And of course now, with clean energy jobs lost, 100,000, expected 500,000 total estimated losses due to COVID-19, clean energy. There's great opportunity to restart this advanced energy economy, and also to put a lot of these veterans and military spouses to work. They are, in terms of unemployment and underemployment, that's a real sweet spot.
I agree. And Greg, one question I had actually for the both of you, but certainly because of your role, I wanted us to talk for a minute because, again, some of the value here is not just in getting people back to work, but is also building a workforce for a more decarbonized economy. And our veterans, our service members, their families bring a lot of expertise that the energy sector could harness. So I would love to hear you both talk about the role that our veterans and their families can be playing, what skills and expertise they can bring to the table to really help us to, quote, climate-proof our future, as you both say in the op-ed. So just if you would speak to that segment of our population for a moment and talk about how you can leverage their know-how in a clean energy future.
Am I going to lead this one off? Okay.
Go ahead, Greg.
Yeah, no, I think that's exactly right, Kara. You know, the military services today, of course, are much more technical than they were back in the days of CCC. And so service members come to the civilian sector with these technical skills to bear, but don't necessarily know how to translate them to advanced energy, for example. Nor does the advanced energy industry, be it nuclear, you know, wind, solar, grid, and so forth, understand how to bring those veteran skills to bear. And so connecting the two would be something that this CEEC would be able to do with a little bit of awareness, information, a little bit of transition training, you know, workforce development. You know, we can harness those skills. As far as the military spouses have long been a hugely untapped resource, largely because they get pulled around by their military service member around the world and never get a chance to plant themselves and really leverage their skill sets. This is a great industry for them as well. And in terms of unemployment and underemployment, roughly 25% military spouses are unemployed and 50% underemployed. And that was going into this crisis. COVID has exacerbated that problem.
Yeah, I would add on that, that our military has long served to model the advances in behaviors that we want as a nation. You know, if you think back to racial integration in the military, which occurred, you know, while we still had Jim Crow throughout much of the South, if you think, you know, the fits and starts of integrating, you know, gays in the military, but still, you know, it modeled kind of the direction of the country. And if you also think to the military's environmental record, which in the last quarter century has gone from being seen as an environmental laggard to today an environmental and clean energy leader. And that's what, you know, when the base commander says, "Thou shalt recycle," everyone on the base recycles because they know it's a command, right? So we know how to, you know, what we need, for example, the fifth fuel here is energy efficiency. That's another piece of this. We know how to do that. A lot of it is in behavioral change. And I think our military community, broadly speaking, active duty, retired, veterans, military families, they get it. You all here at Truman get it too. So, and I think the broader community, civilians as well, we understand where we need to go as a society. And that's why we can, through this program, help model that behavior we need as a nation.
Kara, I wonder if I could add something else to what Sherri just said, and that is that, you know, that there's a national security element here. You know, you at Truman understand this better than anyone, that are not only in terms of our competitiveness around the world and in advanced energy, we have distinctive competencies that we have kind of gone latent, particularly in things like nuclear. We need to get back on top of that. But also, you know, our veterans and military spouses know better than anyone the cost of being overly dependent upon foreign sources of energy. And I mean, that's the last 20 years we've been at war for a number of reasons. One of them is our energy dependence on places like the Persian Gulf region. And so, the more that we can make this a competitive advantage as a nation, the better off we're going to be.
Absolutely. That's so many different things that you both just hit on in there. And I'm gonna keep plowing ahead to help folks understand this idea that you've both brought to light and borne out in this Hill article. And I understand hopefully more to come on this idea. But if you can tell us, here's a community, I'll sort of ask this as a twofer here in the interest of moving us along, operationalizing the idea. So who do we think would be running this program? Do we have any sense as to how much funding it might require? And along those lines, a number of folks in the Truman community are either actively serving or are working for organizations that are helping to support the value of service and realizing more of this untapped potential, whether it's in our youth or in our older population. So what kinds of partnerships are you looking to bring to this program to help either bring it out of the conceptual stage and into reality, or to just, again, build this out in a way that really does bring forward more folks into the field of clean energy, helping to build this resilient future that we all know is so desperately needed?
Well, we do have, we have an existing corporation for national service under which has been housed the more recent national service programs, AmeriCorps, and there are several others. That would be sort of a logical home for it, or I think organizationally within the government. As terms of partners, Truman, the Veterans Advanced Energy Project, I mean, many other think of all the clean energy associations that exist out there. I already see some small business leaders on our call today kind of raising their hands to talk about what they can contribute and the needs they have in their businesses. I mean, I think this is all part of the broad-based coalition that can turn the idea into a reality.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I would start, it needs to be bipartisan, obviously. We've seen some bipartisan support already. The David Brooks New York Times article is a call to service. Members of Congress of the Feds rally towards the idea of national service, at least broadly. And as long as we keep energy center at bipartisan appeal, I agree with you, that there are lots of advanced energy industry out there that I think would love to grow in on this idea. When we do a Veterans Advanced Energy Summit, we have veteran advanced energy business owners screaming for people that can be program managers, site managers, project managers, fire and forget kind of people that they're lacking. And so there's a real demand signal out there for people with these advanced energy skills.
As somebody who works for the state of New York, I couldn't agree more. We want to see that pipeline being built every day, and you both have identified a number of organizations that can potentially be helpful. And Sherri, as you mentioned, we're seeing some items come through the chat where folks are stepping up. So certainly if there's interest, please do reach out. This is an idea that, again, has a lot of appeal, and I imagine the appeal within this community is very high. So if you have ideas for Sherri and for Greg, as this idea starts to move forward, I would imagine both of you would be receptive to ideas and partnership opportunities to help carry this forward in a bipartisan fashion. So to move on, we've been talking a good bit about public service, and certainly this program also helps to invoke some of our commitments and our sort of history of service in this country. one of the statistics I'd like to share with you both have obviously led very storied careers in public service, defining public service broadly. In a recent report, Inspired to Lead from the National Commission on Military, National, and Public Service, they found that 2 million people serve in federal civilian jobs, 5 million in state government, such as yours truly, 14 million in local and tribal governments, yet Americans under the age of 35 make up 35% of the nation's workforce, but only 17% of our federal civilian workforce. And furthermore, 30% of the civilian service, including a majority of senior agency executives, will be eligible to retire in 5 years. So the question I want to pose to you both, it can be within the context of the CEEC, but it can also be more broadly. How can we attract and retain more people into the field of service?
Yeah. Sherri, shall I start with that one? I'm not seeing Sherri, Cara. Is Sherri still on the
I'm
line?
wondering if we lost her by accident.
All right. She'll zorch back in. Let me kick this one off. You know, as a father of an 18 and 22-year-old, it's something I've scratched my head about as well. Both, you know, my wife, their mother, and I have both been immersed in service for decades. And while they, you know, our kids, you know, think in theory, you know, it's a good thing in terms of taking practical steps to doing it, maybe not so much, you know. So why? And they're good kids. I think that part of it is that kind of governance is in service has kind of got a bit of a bad name for a whole host of reasons. And we don't need to do a, you know, history lesson, but you know, it's not cool like it used to be. You know, I mean, back in the in World War I, World War II, all the way up to Korea, you know, the best and the brightest would serve, and then they would go on for the rest of their lives. And that's not necessarily the case anymore. You know, my wife wrote a book about it called AWOL, and it's a problem when, you know, those who are leading us don't have any sense of service, any sense of what they're asking those who serve to do. And so how to you know, sort of breach that you know, to me, service needs to become cool again. It needs to become noble. It needs to become, you know, young people who are ambitious, who want to make a difference in the world, need to see service as a way to do that. And I think there could be no better example than what we've seen with COVID. You know, we have been reminded anew of the importance of good governance, for example, and the problem associated with bad governance, and that you want to be on the good side. I mean, you know, Governor Mario Cuomo, up where you are, Cara, you know, has been a great example of how leadership in times of crisis can have a disproportionate effect upon millions and millions of people. And those are just in New York, to say nothing about the rest of the country that are following his lead. That's service. And people like Governor Cuomo can make service cool again. And that's where we need to go.
I think there may also be an inflection point here. You know, for the last quarter century, I think since I felt the calling of public service when I was, you know, in my early years, and that drew me in and seemed much more worthwhile a calling than a lifelong pursuit in the private sector. But I think that's changed in the last quarter century or more from a we society to more of an I society today. And maybe now we'll see, you know, we'll begin to see that reverse back to understanding, you know, the greater good, not just about, you know, what I get for my individual self. And I think that because trust in governments has risen during this crisis, and it has fallen to historic lows. And so that is an opportunity, a vein of trust into which we need and should tap as a nation.
Yeah, I completely agree. And and I think it really helps that the COVID crisis has put those who are serving, particularly essential service providers, up on a pedestal. I mean, the Blue Angel Thunderbird, flyby, for service personnel. That's fantastic. They're not doing that flyby for investment bankers. They're doing it for service personnel. They're making it cool again, to help your fellow man and woman. And also, ultimately, Abraham Lincoln, listen to your better angels. I think that could be people are being reminded that it's better to pull together rather than pull apart, that all these, political socioeconomic divides that have been so rampant these past years are sort of being mended by this common cause. We're reminded of, our common humanity, and ultimately, that leads to a sense of service.
So let me take this to the next level and ask, do you think it should be a requirement that we have some kind of a service, that Americans serve in some type of a capacity, whether it's through the military, whether it's through public service, in government of sorts? Should there be a requirement? Would that help to sort of take what we're seeing now and some of the goodness that we're seeing emerge from COVID and really build on that in a way that really sort of solidifies it going forward? Do either of you think that there should be some kind of a requirement for service?
Kara, personally, I think that's a bridge too far and might become self-defeating to the overall purpose. I think we want people who want to step up. Think how popular the Teach for America program was in its early years.
Sherri, we're losing you.
Sherri, we may have lost you.
All right, let me pick it up. I agree with Sherri. I think for now, mandatory national service is a bridge too far. It's hard for me to imagine, how we would win bipartisan support for such an enormously expensive and vast program as that would take. And it's very difficult for me to believe that we could provide effective governance for it, which means that it could get sullied just by bad management. I think maybe taking a more iterative approach with self-selected Americans who are drawn to advanced energy, for example, such as our program recommends, is a much more practical first step.
So then returning to your program, and hopefully Sherri will be able to be back online here in just a moment.
Okay, I'm back. Can you hear me?
There she is. Yes, okay. Excellent. So transitioning a little bit here into, again, a topic I know is very close to both of your hearts, is climate security. And thinking about how the CEC, as we've talked about, is, again, one way that we can look to rebuild post-COVID, and not just out of the COVID crisis, but potentially for future crises. And you both have talked about, and I think, Greg, especially hearing a lot of your optimism for just how this has really brought our country together and shown some very softer sides and care to one another in our view of who really can be on the front lines in these types of situations. I would love to hear you both just focus a little bit more on that and to say, what has the pandemic actually revealed to you in terms of our nation's ability to respond, in particular to unforeseen and prolonged crises? And what should we be doing to prepare for the climate challenges that lie ahead in our future, some of which we're realizing today, but we know without a lot of action will only get worse over time. So what has this situation said to you about what we need to be doing going ahead?
Well, we know climate change is the threat multiplier, and we're seeing it play out this way even in this crisis. I mean, where some say, climate was the trigger and COVID was the bullet, because we see the spread of infectious disease occurring because of higher temperatures around the world. And now we're going to see cascading risks. We're about to move into a hurricane season that is is projected to be very intense along the East Coast of the United States, Gulf Coast, East Coast. So we're going to have cascading crises occurring, the complications of responding to hurricanes and wildfires in certain parts of the country where we're still in a social distance situation is going to make that even more complicated. And we know what we've learned is we weren't prepared for the pandemic, and we're not prepared for the climate crisis on a significant scale. So we have a responsibility to prepare and to protect. And we should, we've been saying that for a while, but we should really use it to act on it. Just as we know, there was a pandemic playbook in place at the beginning of this administration, which wasn't used. There's been a lot of good work done in the last decade or so to elevate attention to and increase awareness of climate security threats throughout parts of the security community, intelligence, homeland security, other parts, energy. I don't think we yet have a playbook in place for responding to multiple natural disasters, climate aggravated in the U.S. time. That's something we need to pay more attention to. We need to do the planning, and then we need to look at how we would resource it, because as is often said, a strategy without resources is hallucination.
Yeah. So I agree. I think that COVID has reminded us that the Nero approach, fiddling while Rome burns, is not a responsible way to govern. We've been reminded of the importance of good governance, which includes preparedness. And I think this translates directly to preparedness for climate change. This may be enough to move people to take action to better prepare. There are tools out there that right now that will help us identify the risks of climate change disruptions, forecast the risks, and harden our critical infrastructure to those risks, yet we're not using them. Why?
So let's build off of that, Greg, because I think that where I'd like to go next here in this question is, you both hit on the fact that we are severely underinvesting. In your op-ed, you note that we're investing half as much in our advanced energy and water infrastructure as we did in the 1970s. So that is quite dismal, and realizing the magnitude of our challenges, obviously that needs to be a much higher number. But if we could take a moment and specifically have you both outline what you would want to see in some sort of a coronavirus stimulus package, if that package were to speak to and help build this country's climate resiliency going forward, what would you want to see in that type of a package?
Well, so first element would be establishing the CEEC under an existing, auspice like the Corporation for National Service, and imbuing it with the authorities and the ability to retain people and then put them to work. The second really underfunded area in our nation, which was true long before the COVID crisis hit us, but has been growing to the point where it's become, a strategic shortfall, I think, for the United States, is our underinvestment in science and technology, as Greg noted. And that's really been across the board. That's been one of America's strategic competitive advantages since the end of World War II. I mean, that's how, think back to the Manhattan Project. I mean, that's how we built the prowess of our national security enterprise upon which most of us have been part of today, and most of the Truman community is connected to. We're losing that competitive edge, not only in defense, but in the civilian sector as well, through our investments in the National Science Foundation, in other key federal agencies where we do research and development. We need to regain that competitive edge, and that's going to be important also for the advanced energy transition, because that's going to help us not only with the energy technologies we need, but it's also about improving our climate resilience, because there's a whole suite of climate proofing technologies, predictive capabilities that are just over the horizon now. Some of them are beginning to be commercialized. We will be closing the gap between short-term weather predictions and longer-term global climate models. That's coming, but it's not coming fast enough. And there are advances that need to be made both in data analytics and predictive capabilities. And that's another area in which we should be investing.
Right. Yeah, we need, it needs to begin with understanding the threat. Just as we didn't understand the threat of COVID, and we didn't take it seriously enough initially. We haven't been treating the threat of climate security, understanding it and treating it seriously enough. So that's the first step. You know, getting past the political silliness and talking about facts. The second thing is obviously, as Sherri said, to prepare for it. Prepare by rebuilding our critical infrastructure smartly, hardening it to climate disruptions, and using advanced energy principles to have diversity, you know, in our grid, so that we build in energy security from the ground up, and the technology is there to do it. So this is the opportunity.
Great. So I want to encourage folks. We do have I do have a question that's come in via the chat. I'm going to get to that question next, because both Sherri and Greg hit on the theme of preparation, and I want to take a moment to elevate a report that Sherri was a part of. But if others have questions, go ahead, start sending those in. Barbie, I will get to your question next, but before I do, I want to take a moment. Sherri, you were a member of the Climate Security Advisory Group that, in partnership with GW's Elliott School for International Affairs, developed a climate security plan for America that was released in September of last year. I'd love for you to take a moment to tell us about that report and what it advised. And others, please go ahead and start to share your questions.
Sure, and thank you, Kara. So the Climate Security Advisory Group is a group of dozens of senior national security officials, many senior retired military and other national security professionals, many of whom I've worked with since I founded the CNA Military Advisory Board some 13 years ago now.
We lost
No,
Sherri.
Sherri, I think we, yep.
Again, can you hear me now?
There you are. You're back.
Yes,
Am I
you're
back? Okay. And it's a strategic vision for climate security for the United States. And there's really four main themes, four main types. The whole report, it's got recommendations by agency, covering lots of different regions, but I'll just give you the top line themes. First is leadership, demonstrating leadership, making climate change a vital national security priority. And that will be important from the White House. Second, assessing climate risks. You know, I mentioned just we have this, we're moving into this area of improved predictive capability. We have unprecedented foresight about climate change. We need to do a better job of assessing the risks at the local level in a way that makes sense for our national security planning and strategies. Third, we need to support our allies. Just go around the world, and so many countries say that climate change is their top national or foreign policy priority. And we need to listen to our allies and partners and work with them, reinforce U.S. national security, and compete on the world stage by bolstering climate resilience abroad. And then finally, we need to prepare for and prevent, the worst climate impacts by building resilience to climate risks and reducing their scale and scope. And nowhere is that going to be more important than our critical infrastructure. That's where the CEEC comes in, because we can help make our critical infrastructure more resilient through those.
Uh-oh, I think we lost you again, Sherri.
Yeah. Yeah. I think we lost her.
Okay, I'm just going to give it just another moment. Okay, well, unfortunately, since we've lost Sherri, Greg, I did have a question specifically for you before I transition to this question here, which I think could be for both of you, and so it would be great to have Sherri back on. But Greg,
Sure.
You posited recently, in terms of national defense, climate change is likely to make a bad region worse. The region's destabilized by resource shortfalls and great ethnic tensions, disease, poor governance, stresses, could push these regions over the edge through the exacerbating influence of climate change. As a response, you suggest a regional approach as opposed to a DoD-wide one-size-fits-all approach is reasonable and feasible, and the Unified Combatant Commanders is one such available mechanism. Would love to hear you take a couple of moments to talk about the vision that you were starting on here and have you fill in a little more.
Sure, happy to. You know, and we could probably begin with NORTHCOM, the Combatant Command, responsible for CONUS operations, and our ability to project force around the world is threatened by climate change. Naval base Norfolk is seeing sunny day flooding on a routine basis, and we project power around the world, largest naval base in the world. So it starts at home. To your point, Kara, about how we might think about this from a defense perspective, that is climate security, climate change, and its exacerbating effects, probably a good place to start is to take a look at, as combatant commanders do, where the highest probability is that we're going to have to respond as a nation, as a military, with military forces. And, beyond peer-to-peer, conventional competition, a pretty good place to start would be, countries that are most threatened by climate change, already unstable countries, and the exacerbating effects are going to push them over the edge and lead to crisis of one kind or another, be it mass migration or otherwise, or humanitarian assistance, disaster relief operations that DoD might have to embark upon. And so, while the combatant commanders are most certainly aware of climate change disruptions, as written into our national security strategy, national defense strategy, in terms of, as Sherri called it, a threat multiplier. We may have, as this threat becomes greater, we may have to a greater degree, apportion and allocate military resources in such a way as to better respond to these climate crises. A good place to start looking would be in the Arctic, for example, which is increasingly becoming an area of nation-nation competition, both economic and potentially military competition, because of the opening of the Arctic due to climate change.
Thanks, Greg. And maybe what I'll ask Rakia, if you wouldn't mind, since Sherri didn't get to quite finish out, and I do want to ask Barbie's question, if you might be able to send a link to the Climate Security Plan for America so that other folks can see the recommendations that Sherri was beginning to detail, but so we can also get to Barbie's question for the two of you now that we have Sherri back on.
Okay.
Thanks, Rakia.
Yeah.
So the question from Barbie Applewhite, one of our members out in California, I believe, Barbie, here in Southern California. As the states and local governments grapple with significant budget cuts because of the pandemic, how do you recommend we advocate to maintain and develop clean energy programs?
To make sure I understood the question, is this how do states continue to advocate for clean energy programs
I think specifically given the crisis that a number of states are facing, including my own, this is certainly a question that hits home. Given that we're seeing a lot of budgetary challenges within states and within localities, how can we as a community who wants to see clean energy progress continue? How can we advocate to maintain and further develop programs in a time of such a fiscal crisis across the country?
Well, I think your voices at the state and local level are really important. In New York, you have, one of the most aggressive clean energy and climate goals of any state, right? And I don't
Indeed we do. Thank you, Sherri.
Right. I don't think the governor is backing down in the face of the crisis, right? I mean, it's not what he spends his time mostly talking about on his daily news conference. I now know his pasta sauce recipe in detail. I assume he's going to get there at some point, and he's very proud of that. And many other governors, California, but even places like, think of Republican states like Texas that have become powers, energy, wind powers. Wind power, very, very much made the transition to wind power. And so we shouldn't give that up. And they're now in the transition of being able to integrate renewables better onto the grid. And as we get more advanced storage, so we don't want to lose that, lose that ground now. And since the jobs in coal and the oil patch are going to continue to decline, this is an opportunity to sort of still maintain that aggressiveness in those goals. Now, obviously, federal leadership matters. I'm not going to say it doesn't. And vote, elections matter. So we all have to vote. And we also federal and, at the state and local level, and empower those voices to be heard. And I would say all of you who are working at the state and local level, those of you in small businesses where you're trying to, change how we do business, what we do business on. Continuing to have your voices heard is really, really important.
So, I think we could learn something from CCC on this one, because as you probably know, in the CCC, while the what was it called, Roosevelt's Tree Army, they were housed, and fed by the Army. They were turned over to states for state projects. And so the federal government was smart enough to look at least the states for the best source of ideas for the kind of projects that, would ultimately they would work on. I think that we're in a similar place. The states know best what kind of advanced energy, critical infrastructure projects are required. And so, I see a real partnership between, a federal CEC and then, looking to the states and local for the kind of projects that these CEC members would work on.
Great. Well, I realize that we are very close to time here, so I'm going to go ahead and wrap up our Q&A portion so that we can hand it back over to Jenna and go ahead and wrap up here. So again, thank you all so much for the conversation today. And I guess before handing it to Jenna, I'll just note that you both have been very open, certainly the dialogues that we've had, and I imagine you're open to other ideas from the Truman community about how we can help to really push the CEC forward as the next generation CEC. Wow, a lot of C's, but working on it there. So, I know this community is bubbling with ideas. And Barbie says thank you, and she is a political partner in Los Angeles. So with that, Jenna, we'll hand it back over to you to close.
You all, I just want to mention that our next piece is coming out tomorrow, and we'll send you the link to it. It'll be in the Hill at 1 p.m. tomorrow afternoon.
See, perfect timing. We got a preview today. So thank you both so much for that. And Jenna, over to you.
Great.
Well, thank you so much. I think we could have had an entire day talking about these issues. There really just is so much. And it's so clear that we have before us nothing short of really tectonic shifts in our geopolitics and what these challenges mean. And things are really getting real, as my kids would say. And so we really appreciate y'all joining us this afternoon. I'd like to just flag that we have a number of excellent links in the chat that we encourage folks to copy and paste. We can send those around after the fact as well. And we want to just share that we have a lot of tremendous programming coming up. We have Ben Rhodes next week. He was the former Deputy National Security Advisor to President Obama. We have George Packer the following week, whose excellent article in The Atlantic about the U.S. as a failed state, I think, is on everybody's must read in this moment. So we have a lot of great member-led content coming up as well. So including a watch party for Space Force, the Netflix series, on May 30th, which should be really fun and give us all a much needed laugh. So we hope all of you stay healthy and safe, and we look forward to seeing you here again soon. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you all, and a special thank you to Isabella, who is my research assistant, who just finished her undergraduate degree at USC.
Congratulations, Isabella. All right. Take care, everybody.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.